This is Brother Jamal bringing you another podcast talk here. Um, just wanted to just kind of go off of the last podcast we did. Um, what I'm gathering is there's a lot of discussion going on right now about um, who killed Brother Malcolm. And so, one of the things that I said this on the last podcast video, and I'll repeat myself again. You have to simply ask yourself the question. This is simply a investigative question that you would ask. After all these years, after all this time, you have a brother who comes out and raising the questions and putting a lot of stuff out there to cause a lot of strife and rift in the black community. You simply have to ask yourself the question, who's behind it and who would benefit? Just ask yourself that question and think about, after all these years, after all this time, and you saw the movie that was put out about Brother Malcolm, and so all of a sudden we have someone is bringing up this question about who murdered Malcolm X after all this time and all these years, even after the Malcolm X movie has been put out. We still have this coming up. So you have to ask yourself a question. Once again, I simply pose two questions to you. Who's behind it and who would benefit? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. I know there's some things on Netflix that people are watching, and so even with that, you have to do like an investigative reporter would do. Ask yourself the question, who's behind it and who would benefit after all this time that has passed? Why would someone be putting out and bringing a movie out about who killed Malcolm X? And let me just say too, people should be real careful about what they say and how they move. For example, who's behind it, who would benefit, why, who, when, who would benefit from this, who's behind this, you know? And so you ask those kind of questions as an investigative reporter. That's how you ask the questions to get the bottom, to get to the root of what it is that's being asked. Like I said, the main two questions you would ask in talking about who killed Malcolm X, who would benefit from this, and who's behind it. I mean, what do we know about this person who has, asked yourself the question, what do we know about this person who has put out this information and raising these kind of questions on Netflix? What do we know about him? Who's behind him? You know, where did he come from? You know, raise these kind of questions. And so these are the things that people need to think about as they watch this movie. And you have to, the best lesson that I could give to anyone, if you want to know the real truth about Brother Malcolm's life, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabar's life, read his autobiography. Our autobiography tells the life and time, the when and where and the whys of that person's life. Not a movie, not a documentation, but the real truth that is told about a person's life is most likely you can catch that in the autobiography. So I'm saying to people, check out the autobiography. Maybe that's too much for somebody to read. Maybe it's easy to watch a movie or watch what somebody has put together. So I'm saying this person who has put this movie out, don't be surprised about the kind of reaction that you are getting. I mean, what did you expect? You know, somebody pops up after all this time. Malcolm X was murdered February the 21st, 1965, in the Audubon Ballroom in New York City. So here we are, 2020, after all these 20, 30, 40, 50 some years. Here someone comes out with a documentation about who murdered Brother Malcolm. And so if you don't have any solid foundation, if you don't have any solid information, and you just going around talking to people, interviewing people, stirring up things, stirring up emotions, stirring up feeling, making accusations, if you don't have any sound information, then once again I simply raise the question, who's behind this and who would be the one that would benefit from this? That's the question that you have to ask yourself. That's the question on the table. See? So, and look, I have to share this with you because this is something from history. Myself and Brother Charles Knox, we go back 20 some years back in the day. And we used to talk about this sometime when we would get together. We would kick around and just kind of have a discussion about back in the late 60s, maybe it was like 63, 64, sometime. We saw a memo. Myself and Brother Knox, we saw a memo. We read a memo. He actually sent in for his Freedom of Information Act and to get all the files and the records that the FBI had on him. We also at that time we saw a document. This had to be there was a document put out in the late 60s, and it was put out by J. Edgar Hoover. That was a document. And the document simply read about who they considered to be the greatest threat in galvanizing, electrifying, and mobilizing the black community. They had a couple of people on there that they listed who they considered to be a threat. Dr. King was one of the people they didn't consider him to be a threat. They didn't consider Elijah Muhammad to be a threat. The people who they considered to be a threat to mobilize, galvanize, and organize and move the black community, it was Stokely Carmichael, Kwame Ture, who has passed, H. Ralph Brown, Jamil Alameen, who is incarcerated now, who is Brother Stokely Carmichael and H. Ralph Brown were Black Panther members back in the day, and Malcolm X. Those are the three individuals that they consider to be a threat to be able to mobilize, organize, and galvanize and electrify and move the black community. Those three individuals, they had in a memo. And the FBI, and they said that they would never be caught off guard again like there was when the whole civil rights movement kicked off, when the whole Black Power movement kicked off. When that whole era kicked off, it caught them off guard because they was not prepared and they didn't think it was going to pick up the steam and the mobilizing and the movement like it did. But the civil rights movement / the Black Power movement, it took off. And when it took off and when they realized the objective of it and where it was going, that's when they began to target individuals. They target black organizations. They target individuals. They target Stokely Carmichael. They target H. Ralph Brown, and they target Malcolm X. Those three individuals they targeted at that particular time at the height of the movement, early 60s, late 60s. And so this is a significant part of what went on during that time. Now, this brother, I don't know how old he is. I don't know where he's getting his information from. But if he went around and he didn't live through that period and don't know what's happening, then all he's doing is going around talking and interviewing people, trying to get bits and pieces about what happened. And we're talking about the fact that we know what happened. You know, we know who was responsible, who murdered Brother Malcolm. We know that. We know who murdered Brother Malcolm. We know who was responsible for that. I mean, in the movie, a Malcolm X movie, you see some clips and you see some things that went on in the movie which indicates, you know, what happened, who was behind it, who was involved. It indicates that. See? And this was Malcolm was, in the memo that we saw in the late 60s, Malcolm was one of the people that they considered to be a threat to America, a threat to organizing, mobilizing, and actually moving the black community. He was one of the top people that they considered to be a threat, was Malcolm X, Elijah Malik El-Shabazz. He was one of those people. And so all of the things that happened during that time, it was not surprising to us, it was not shocking to us, because we knew that they had targeted Brother Malcolm. We knew that they had targeted him. So I'm saying we have to know the history. We have to know what we're talking about. Before we begin to put out stuff, we need to know the facts, time, dates, places, who did what. And when you go around and talking and interviewing and trying to gather this information now, then your information is not going to be accurate, it's not going to be sound, and it's going to be going off of a bunch of hearsay, he say, and not really knowing and not getting the figures, not getting the actual facts of what actually happened. So once again, this whole idea, this whole discussion about who killed Malcolm X, that's on the table now. I'm saying once again, ask yourself the question, ask yourself two questions: who's behind it and who would benefit? Once again, this is Brother Jamal bringing you a podcast, and inshallah we'll be back with you future-wise to bring you some more podcasts on this subject matter.